Good morning and welcome back to our sustainable journey. I'm Steve. It is currently -10. Feels like -23. That's kind of awesome. So I'm in the barn with the worms and I wanted to do a quick review. It's been about a year since we built the first CFT. We now have 5 in here and build some more, but we have 5 of them. And I want to kind of go through the pros and cons, what works, what doesn't work, what would I change next time, etc. on these guys. So you can see we've got 3 here. There's 2 against this wall over here. So let's start, we'll make it a compliment sandwich, right? So you start with pros, then you talk cons, then you talk pros again. So pros is probably affordability. I built these for like 200 bucks. Actually, the first one I built with materials I had, except for the piping on the bottom, but $200. So that's way cheaper than the commercial ones that are like 7 or 8 grand, which I think is kind of ridiculous for worms and scraps and things like that. So 200 bucks. And my philosophy is always there shouldn't be a barrier to entry. What that means is you and I cannot go out and start a mom and pop store and compete with Amazon. The barrier to entry is too high, it's too expensive, and so it prevents people from actually joining in to do things, right? Whereas $200, that's a little bit more affordable. A lot of people can do it. Some people have found ways to do it cheaper, which is awesome. And a lot of people have taken the design and modified it and added some cool things to it, which is the whole idea. I didn't want to, you know, sell the instructions on how to build these. I think capitalism is kind of a dumb system. So I want people to have access to these things because I want more people to be composting with worms, just composting in general, and just keeping stuff out of landfills, because that's kind of the whole idea. We're all on this journey together to be more sustainable. So, pro, affordability, right? Another pro for me is ease of filling them up, right? So we have these plastic covers. You can pull this back a little bit. So this was filled Friday. Today is, I gotta think about what day is today. Today's Wednesday. And so it's really easy for me to just pour stuff over the top of these, and so that's a big convenience thing. But I'm about 6 foot tall. My wife is 5'3", so it's a little harder for her. So in some ways it's a pro for me, probably a con for her. But they hold 2 feet. So this side is 2 feet, so it'll hold about 2 feet worth of stuff. And so each week we add about an inch or 2, probably an inch, of food scraps. And so you can get a lot in here, right? Because we add 50 to 100 pounds a week into each of these. And so they take a lot of scraps. So let's talk some cons. They're heavy. They are really, really heavy. So it takes the 2 of us to move them when they're empty. When they're full, I have to use a tractor or a pallet jack in order to be able to move them. Because they are crazy heavy. They're just, and even when they're not full, it's not easy to move them. When they're full, you definitely have to, because they can hold, I think we calculated about 3,000 pounds of food scraps can fit in one of these before it reaches the top. So they get heavy. So that's a big con. Another con is the harvest process. Because you're on your back, it's very labor intensive, which everything on the farm here is labor intensive, so that's not really a big deal. But that's another con. And mobility. So if I wanted to do something else in this part of the barn, I can't. I have to be able to move all of these out of here to be able to get to this back wall. So that's kind of a big con. And then probably maybe because they're wood, I guess. So that's always a concern of ours, is keeping wood wet. But I kind of want to take one of the sides off of these to see what that's done to the insides, but then everything would pour out and that would be devastating, so we're not going to do that. But keeping the wood wet is a fear of mine with it rotting, or with it being treated wood and getting some of the chemicals in there. But then you read studies where it says the average American eats about a credit card worth of plastic a year in everything that they consume, which is probably way worse than what's going into these castings, which then go into farmers' fields, which then go into food. So I don't know, you're not going to win no matter what you do. So that's kind of a con. And I was worried about that, you know, people voice concerns about the wood rotting or breaking down or whatever. We haven't seen it. We check them every week when we feed the worms. You can see it's not like, it's solid. And this one's 2/3 full. So all of them, they're rock solid. Which is, you know, I guess we go back to the compliments now. I've actually knocked one of these over. When we were moving them with the tractors into place, I bumped one and it fell over. Stuff spilled out, it was a mess. But I think it was this one that I knocked over. And it's rock solid. Like, we just stood it back up and it was fine again. What do you know, right? So they're solid. So that's another good thing. And they're easy to maintain. I guess that's another good thing, versus smaller populations. Smaller bins are harder to maintain, because if there's something the worms don't like, if I put something over here that's highly acidic in this part of the bin, the worms can go over here because they can get away from it. But if you do that in a smaller bin, they don't have the luxury of being able to get too far away from it. So that's a big pro, is just their size, and how much they can handle. You know, if we filled them all up, you know, 3,000 pounds each, that's 15,000 pounds of food scraps at any one point in time that we could keep out of landfill. So that's pretty awesome. I'm pretty proud of that. And we collect between, I think we're averaging, last year we averaged about 500 pounds a week in food scrap. A little more than that. It was 511 or 520 or something like that, but we'll say 500 pounds a week in food scraps that we collect through our food scrap service. This year we're trending a little bit higher than that. I think we've had 3 collections so far in January, and we're averaging about 1,000 pounds so far, because we're just adding more customers, adding more restaurants, and so we're collecting a lot more. I'm not counting the hemp, and I'm not counting the brewer's grains into that number, because that's just separate and more sporadic, and I'm just interested in households and food scraps, keeping track of those numbers. I mean, we keep track of the others, but I don't have them easily tracked. So what else? Volume of worms. You can do a lot more with a big bin like this than you can with the little bins, but at the same time, there's nothing wrong with the little bins, because these were $200, right? I've gotten 15-gallon totes. I think they're maybe $10 at one of the big box stores, which is relatively affordable for most people. And then I've had people use 5-gallon buckets, which are great. There's nothing wrong with them. Those you can actually get for free at like a if you go to like a bakery, they get some of their ingredients in 5-gallon pails, and they will give them away because they have no place for them. So that's an option, is to get free 5-gallon buckets. Those are great. There's nothing wrong with free. I've seen people use litter containers or old buckets of any kind, just to keep the food scraps out of landfills, because that stuff, it it's not benefiting anybody. Because what happens with the landfill is usually they're lined with some sort of liner, right? So yeah, stuff will break down, but it's not going to benefit anyone, you know, versus with the worm castings, you get to use this stuff in gardens and, you know, kind of recycle it through more food. And that's kind of the whole idea versus a landfill. Nobody's going through a landfill taking that stuff and sprinkling it onto a garden or a farmer's fields. That would be disgusting. So yeah. So that's the CFTs. I mean, a year in, I'm pretty proud of how well these things have done. You see they bow a little bit. I'll show it from this angle. You can see that slight bow, right? This one doesn't a little bit, but yeah, they're bowed a little bit. But I mean, who cares? It's food scraps, it's rotting stuff. As far as pests go, we probably have some. Actually, I know we have some. I know we have like pill bugs or roly-polies or woodlouse, whatever you want to call them. Those things in here, but they're good composters. Or I think in the past we've had fungus gnats and black soldier flies and things like that. But again, good composters. They're here to break this stuff down. None of them are bad. I guess we could have mice, but we have the barn cats that take care of that. So that's never been an issue. Although barn cats in and of themselves are kind of bad for the environment with all they kill a lot of songbirds. So they're not necessarily ideal, but at the same time we don't have mice digging through these bins, making holes and ruining stuff. So we kind of keep them away from the birds as best we can. So put a bell on them, put a collar on them, and that will prevent them from killing all the birds in your area if you do have barn cats. So yeah, so I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about. Just kind of show you that these things are going strong. So I just wanted to show you these things are going strong a year in. Worms are doing their job, breaking everything down, helping convert this stuff into basically fertilizer that we provide to local farmers or our own garden, and keeping this stuff out of landfills. Just the whole idea. So thanks for watching. We will see you all next week. Have a good one.